Hi there, everyone. Welcome to the State of the Community Foundation Town Hall. My name is Sutton Mora Hayes, and I work here at the Community Foundation. We want to thank you all for being with us and taking the time to be here today. Before we get started, I want to remind you of some housekeeping notes. I will be moderating some questions at the end of the presentation. So if you have questions, and we hope you do, we encourage you to put them in the Q&A box, which is down at the bottom of the screen. You may be used to seeing a chat box, but we don't have a chat box. So just the Q&A button, use that to submit your questions. We will try to sort through all of them and get to all of them after the presentation. Just a reminder too that this is being recorded and being streamed to Facebook, so you can keep that in mind as well. So again, to be mindful of everybody's time and to thank you for being here, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our board chair, Terri Lee Freeman.
Again, welcome to this year's State of the Community Foundation. Thank you for being here with us. What a difference a year makes. Bob will talk with you about the specifics, but just let me simply say that the foundation has grown in size, but a community foundation is not judged simply on its assets, not by its asset size alone, at least. What's important is how those assets are deployed in the community. The foundation had embarked upon a strategic planning process that was moving us in a particular direction, and then COVID-19 hit. And I have to say that I believe that the public health crisis that we are all going through has really encouraged the Community Foundation to do some of its best work yet. That said, there's still much more that can be done. So let me introduce to you Bob Fockler, our president and CEO, who will talk through the specifics. Bob.
Thanks, Terri. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for joining us. As Terri said, the past couple of years have been truly transformational for the Community Foundation, your Community Foundation. We've seen record growth, the implementation of groundbreaking new strategic plan, and significant reshaping of our role in the community and the ways that we interact with our donors with the onset and the persistence of the COVID-19 pandemic. We didn't have a chance to meet with you all as planned at our annual meeting in May. COVID took that away, along with so many other things in our lives. But with all the advances that we've made in recent months, we really wanted to have a chance to meet with you and discuss where we've been, where we are now, and more importantly, where we're going in the months and years ahead. Even with all the challenges that we face with the current public health crisis, there's so much to report and even more to be done. So much of what I want to talk about today draws on our full history, though, and comes as a direct result of the strategic plan that Terri referred to, which our Board of Governors adopted in December of 2018. That plan was forward-looking and responded both to the increased size and influence of the foundation, the accumulated skills of our staff and advisors, and the shifting needs of our community. Now, with a little luck from technology, let's see if this works. So I wanted to start by taking you back to the last time we all met together, the last foundation-wide gathering. Many of you joined us just over a year ago at the Levitt Shell as we celebrated our 50th anniversary in September of last year. And it's almost a little painful to remember when we could all get together and not worry about social distancing and masks. And by the way, that is Elisa Householdt, or a member of our board, sitting at the table talking to me. But someday we'll get back there. But that night was all about fellowship and fun. It marked an important milestone in our history, 50 years of growth and impact. In fact, I want to start with some of those numbers. Let's see what 50 years has done. It's remarkable to see how far we've come since our founding gift of $1 million from Abe Plow in 1969. Now, the numbers are so relatively small in 1970 and 75, I had to create an inset to show you that there really were numbers down there. But today, we stand with assets in excess of $730 million, making us one of the largest community foundations in the country. That growth represents over 1,000 donors coming together, opening new funds, or adding to the ones that you already have, to manage your own charitable giving and to make this community a better place to live, work, and play. With that growth has come new opportunities for the foundation to invest in our community, but obviously more on that later. Along with that growth in assets, though, has been considerable growth where it counts the most, grants into our community. Now, I've been reporting on this for the past several years, but we saw a very significant uptick in our collective grant making starting in 2013. Since 2015, our total grants each year have exceeded $100 million, again making us actually one of the largest community foundation grant makers in the country. And just for reference, we've been consistently ranked by the Memphis Business Journal as by far the largest grant maker in the Mid-South. And I always like to say that truly demonstrates the power of 1,000 families coming together under the Community Foundation. Together, we can truly do more. But as Terri said, so what? There are more important things than sheer size. Our Board of Governors sought to address that question as they worked to define a new strategic plan in 2018. And as I said, that plan was bold and forward-looking, and it put us in a better place to do such things as to respond to the current pandemic. If I could, I'd like to highlight that process and where it has brought us, because as I've said, it takes us to some new directions. But at the same time, it's careful not to lose sight of where we came from and what fueled all this growth, our donors. So as you hear about all these new things, be comforted by our absolute insistence not only to maintain the quality of services to our donors, but actually to enhance the quality and range of those services that we offer you. So we see a lot of this with our board, and we don't often share these kinds of things with our donors or the broader community, but let me start with our mission statement. Our mission is to strengthen our community through philanthropy. That statement was adopted a long time ago, long before I became president in 2006. It's simple and direct, but a few years ago, we thought that it needed a little explanation. We wanted to make it clear that in order to accomplish that mission, we seek to develop and manage charitable funds and endowments, offering high levels of service to our donors and their successors. We also actively address the needs of the community by examining community issues, securing and distributing resources, advocating for positive change, and convening conversations which encourage donors and the broader community to respond. And finally, we encourage philanthropy in all its forms, and that could be representing our community in regional and national philanthropic forums. It could be advocating for favorable tax laws that encourage and reward charitable giving. And it could even mean founding a group like Give 365 to encourage more of our neighbors to understand the needs of our community and get involved. Give 365, by the way, is celebrating its own 10th anniversary, and this week we're kind of in the middle of celebrating Give 365's 10th anniversary. Picking up where that mission statement left off, our strategic planning process began with the adoption of a vision statement that gives meaning to that vision. It states, the Community Foundation of Greater Memphis will be the hub that connects capital with the solutions that make our community thrive. We will be uniquely positioned to identify, convene for, and develop solutions for our deepest community issues. By providing responsive and flexible services to both our donors and our community, we will be the premier philanthropic services organization in the Mid-South. And it even went further. The board talked a lot about these things. They wanted to show what our specific values are. And I understand that this, with language being what it is these days, throwing words around can be a little bit dangerous because the same words can mean different things to different people. But our board came together on these statements of core values: community, fairness, partnership and collaboration, impact, stewardship, transparency, service, equity and inclusion, accountability, and honesty. Those values govern our actions in the formation of our policies. Now, it's really interesting that in the discussion of these words and in these values, our board came to a pretty interesting place. They wanted to move the foundation from a position of neutrality to one of fairness. And let me explain that a little bit. Being neutral means that you make no value judgments on anything at any time. Fairness recognizes that there are some things out there that are good and some that are bad. We seek to lift up the things that are good and resist the things that are bad. For instance, the foundation used to take a neutral stance on grant making. We would pass through any grant request from a donor as long as the grantee was a valid 501c3. Unfortunately, over the past several years, some white supremacists and other hate groups have managed to get and hold 501c3 status. And that has been used to embarrass many of our peer community foundations for the grants that they've made. So about a year and a half ago, shortly after adopting the strategic plan, the board approved using an additional filter so that we would never make grants to such hate groups. That's fair. What followed then were 10 specific strategic goals that we hope to accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years. And we're sort of in the middle of that process today. They're broken down among the 3 pillars of our strategic plan. Elevating our community, which is understanding our community's needs and drawing resources from our donors and from the broader community to address those needs. Expanding our donor base, which recognizes that even as we have grown, there are still so many more people who could take advantage of our services we just haven't reached yet. And then third, executing for our donors, because that's what we were created to do, and we can always do better. So I wanted to just run through these specific goals. Under elevating our community, goal 1, create a new community endowment that will permanently fund community-based grant making in our community, as we have done with the Community Partnership Fund for the past 25 years. Up until now, the Community Partnership Fund has had no permanent funding source. It's been funded by annual gifts from our donors and the excesses in our operating budget. But our board recognized that to truly address the changing needs of this community, we needed stable, permanent funding. We were set to launch that appeal at our annual meeting in May, which, as you know, never happened. And of course, the environment has changed with the persistence of the COVID pandemic. But you'll be hearing more about what we are calling the Forever Funds, the community endowment that will respond to our community's most pressing needs now, next year, and forever. The second goal is related, and that was to evaluate the work of our grant committees to ensure that they're representative of our community, that they're responsive to its needs, and that they provide new opportunities for our donors to join directly in this important work. We're just starting into that work today, and it's going to be challenging to get it right, but we will. We will absolutely get it right. The third goal was to launch version 2.0 of LiveGiveMidSouth.org, our comprehensive community information system. We did that last December, so that one we just get a big check. And then fourth, we want to continue to grow Give 365. The Give 365 advisory team is all over that one. I should also say, though, the Give 365 is also aware the world has changed in 2020. They're evaluating their giving based on their own values, including their own unique take on equity and the shifting needs of the community. In terms of expanding our donor base, we want to open at least 35 new donor advised funds each year. That's goal 5. And we've consistently exceeded that goal over the years, and we will, again, clearly exceed that goal this year. Goal 6, we specifically want to reach out to donor segments that we've not traditionally touched. We've identified donors of color and executives of our largest corporations as sectors that we have historically underserved in the past. We're currently developing multiple strategies to do just that. And just as importantly, we want to expand and deepen our relationships with professional advisors, the attorneys, accountants, and financial advisors that have such a huge influence on our donors and certainly on prospective donors. We've been very fortunate in this area in the past. We have a great professional advisor community in Memphis, and they know well the advantages of bringing their clients to work with the Community Foundation. Quick personal note, I need to call out the work of Frank Orell here. Frank has been ably managing our relationships with professional advisors for more than a decade, and he will be embarking at the end of this year on a new adventure, which he thinks will be retirement. But anyway, thank you, Frank. And finally, executing for our donors. We want to continue to handle all donor transactions and interactions professionally and as efficiently as possible, keeping costs low and service levels high. Goal 9, we want to continue to offer appropriate and competitive investment options for our donors. I hope you know that in recent months, we've actually launched a menu of new passive investment alternatives, including index fixed income, equity, and balanced options. Those new pools offer direct market returns at substantially lower costs. Our investment committee also continues to adjust the composition of our actively managed funds to respond to ever-changing market conditions. Most recently, they've eliminated alternatives and hedged equity exposures from the balanced active pool, which is by far our largest investment pool. These positions, while intended to provide some diversification and safety in volatile markets, have been a constant drag on returns since the recession of 2008. Again, the committee decided to eliminate these positions entirely while reserving the right, certainly, to add them back at some point in the future. The chart shows the current mix of the balanced active pool, and all of this stuff is available on our website, by the way. This is nothing new. We had a question about whether we had made any changes to the pools in light of market volatility resulting from the pandemic. These specific changes that I just discussed were not directly related to the pandemic, but the alternatives and hedged equity positions were specifically intended to provide stability in volatile market conditions, and they just weren't doing that. So they didn't do that this past spring, and they didn't do it in the recession of 2008, 2009. So as a result, we have increased the fixed income allocation to the balanced active pool from 25% to 35% as we eliminated alternatives. We had been keeping the allocation in fixed income to its minimum of 25% in anticipation of rising interest rates. But right now, that doesn't seem to be a real great fear, and the larger fixed income position will provide some safety from volatile equity markets that we still kind of expect to see in the months ahead. And finally, goal 10, we want to develop a suite of philanthropic tools for our donors and their families to encourage intentional strategic giving. Both Caroline Kubler, our Director of Development, and Amy Beth Dudley, our Director of Donor Services, have been working with 2164, a national specialist which provides multi-generational advising, facilitation, and training for next generation engagement. Both Caroline and Amy Beth have become certified 2164 trainers. And if you've noticed, our fall event series kicked off last month with a session entitled Connecting Wealth and Privilege to Purpose, which was facilitated by 2164. And the fall series will conclude in December with another 2164 presentation called Growing Goodness, which will focus on how to communicate your values to your children and grandchildren. So I'm glad to say that we're making real headway there. As an enhancement to the strategic plan, this is back a year or so ago, a special subcommittee, which included both staff and board members, worked for several months to look at changes that we could make in our internal operations to ensure greater equity and inclusion in our own internal business practices. Their final report was adopted by our board just last month and includes, where is it? There it is. Ensuring diversity of our board and committees, ensuring equitable hiring and promotional practices in our staff, employing vendors that represent the diversity of our community, including providers of our office services, our investment managers, and our banking relationships. And I'll comment specifically with respect to our banking relationships. We're in the process of moving our payroll and retirement accounts to Tri-State Bank, the only Black-owned bank in Memphis. And those deposits, which we estimate to be between $400,000 and $600,000, will represent a very significant investment in Tri-State. So we're very proud to be working with them. We'll also create a new feedback loop so that our grant making is informed by appropriate stakeholders, and we'll produce interactive learning sessions on diversity, equity, inclusion for our board and for our donors. Like our session next month, focused on producing more Black college graduates in Memphis. Interestingly, when they finished the strategic plan, the board crafted specific measures of the success of the plan. And they looked at it in three different ways. First, from the community's perspective, we'll be successful if there's an increased flow of philanthropic capital into the Mid-South. We've started to see that with increased investment from national funders like the Kresge Foundation, which has now been on the ground in Memphis for a couple of years. And sneak preview, we'll shortly be announcing a major investment in Memphis by a new national funder interested in breaking down the barriers to economic mobility here. They will be initially investing $8 million in both Seeding Success, our partner in Beyond the Classroom, and the Community Foundation to develop a comprehensive plan to increase economic mobility in our community. And then based on that, they expect to invest an additional $60 to $100 million in the years ahead in Memphis and the Mid-South. Secondly, the success of our strategic plan will be evidenced by stronger, more resilient nonprofits. We've been investing in the nonprofit capacity building for 20 years, and we believe that we have, in fact, made real progress in that area. And I'll touch on this in a second. But phase 2 of the MidSouth COVID-19 Regional Response Fund was all about building and maintaining capacity in our nonprofits. Our success will also be measured by changes in community indicators, especially those tracked by Live, Give, MidSouth. And we're right now trying to develop those specific indicators that we want to track to see how progress goes there. Our board also saw that positive success should be measured by changes in the Community Foundation itself. Most importantly, they thought if we're successful, we'll be able to respond more nimbly to existing and emerging community issues. And this is where I really want to take some time and examine how far we've come on this. Prior to this past March, the Community Foundation had never been involved in any broad-based community appeal. At the request of city or county government, we had been involved in a number of important initiatives, including the acquisition of the Shelby Farms Green Line and the transformation of the Harahan Bridge. But we had never gone out to the community to ask them to give money to address a specific community need. All that changed on March 15th when I got a call from city government. Doug McGowan, the city's chief administrative officer, called me at home on that Sunday afternoon. He said that the city and county could see what was coming around the corner with COVID-19. He said that he knew that public funds alone could not be enough to respond to the crisis. We needed to raise private capital as well. He asked if the Community Foundation would be willing to head up a regional appeal for private funding to address the emerging needs created by the pandemic. I have to admit, I swallowed really hard, took a step back and told them that we would do whatever we could. The next day, our staff went to work putting together a community-wide appeal. The result was the MidSouth COVID-19 Regional Response Fund. The first thing we did was put together a team. From day one, that has included the City of Memphis, Shelby County Government, Community Foundation, of course, United Way of the MidSouth, and Momentum nonprofit partners. Together, this group has been responsible over the last 7 months for assessing community needs, determining where dollars are best spent, and promoting the fund throughout the region. And to date, the fund has received a total of more than $5.4 million. Stop and think about that. That's incredible. When we launched the fund in March, we had $0, none, zero. And it's incredible how quickly and how strongly the community responded. By the way, the Community Foundation donors played a huge role in that. Through the first 5 months of the fund's existence, donations from our donors constituted fully a third of all donations. That's really incredible. The funds raised were spent in multiple phases. The first phase was immediate impact directly to those agencies that were on the front lines, addressing the needs of individuals and families that were most affected by the onset of the pandemic. Early on, that included agencies like the MidSouth Food Bank and MIFA that were addressing broad needs for food and emergency financial assistance across our community. As weeks went by, additional grants went to smaller agencies that were serving individuals and families in isolated communities that were not being served. And at the end, besides reaching numerous agencies in Shelby County, the fund made grants to agencies in West Tennessee outside of Shelby County, into Eastern Arkansas, and into Northern Mississippi. The fund also helped create new emergency relief funds at Arts Memphis and Welcome to Memphis to provide sorely needed emergency relief to displaced workers in the hard-hit arts and hospitality industries. Remember, too, that all this action came about against the backdrop of social unrest that resulted from the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. As a result, we were determined to support agencies in this process that served and were led by people of color. All told, Phase 1 funded more than $2.4 million in grants to 91 different agencies across our region. We ended Phase 1 in the first week of June as the community was really starting to get back on its feet. The pandemic wasn't going away, but other resources have begun to flow. Notably, there were hundreds of millions of dollars in CARES Act funding that was coming in to nonprofits and for other services, which greatly relieved some of the immediate threats to our neighbors and the agencies which serve them. And that let us turn our attention to Phase 2. Phase 2 was designed to help safety net agencies recover from the financial and operational shocks of the pandemic and prepare themselves to be more resilient so they may better serve both the persistent effects of the pandemic and any other shocks or disruptions that may occur in the future. The advisory committee, which had been surveying agency needs throughout Phase 1, chose a fairly complicated, multifaceted approach to this recovery and resilience phase. It consisted of 4 different funding avenues, and if you'll bear with me, I kind of want to run through them because this is our one chance to report to the broader community on what has been done with the funds raised here. The first of these was capacity building funding to Arts Memphis and Momentum nonprofit partners. Those 2 important partners have been supporting the needs of agencies throughout the pandemic. They each received $200,000 to continue that work. The second piece was a $125,000 grant to Shelby County Schools to support area K-12 students and their families. Working throughout the summer, the schools ultimately chose to direct that funding to purchase 658 hotspots to reconnect students who did not have reliable internet access. And that's been hugely important. As I'm sure you all know, Shelby County Schools opened the year virtually. The third piece of Phase 2 funded direct service support addressing specific capacity building needs uncovered by the crisis. The first was fundraising. Many agencies, particularly agencies led by people of color, do not have the access, capacity, or experience to raise the funds that they need. We funded $75,000 to Network for Good to guide 15 agencies, all of them led by CEOs of color, through a year-long program to develop their fundraising skills. Another major weakness that was uncovered was the preparedness of agencies, particularly small agencies, to properly navigate difficult HR waters with the need to furlough, lay off, and hopefully ultimately rehire staff members. The fund directed $75,000 to an agency called HRO Partners to manage 15 small agencies that have between 10 and 20 employees in a year-long process to review and refine their human resources policies. And finally, the fund directed $65,000 to Risk Alternatives, a highly specialized organization based in Charlottesville, Virginia, that works with agencies on risk management and preparedness for business interruptions. They'll be working with 3 cohorts in 3 targeted sectors: community development, social justice, and youth development. A total of 25 different agencies will be participating in that work. And then finally, the fourth part of phase 2 is simply general operating support for area agencies. So many agencies had taken on new expenses to address the crisis, like heightened cleaning requirements and purchase of protective equipment, and many of them have lost core revenue. The advisory committee thought it was important to offer some unrestricted support to help them fill some of those holes. We kept that support at $50,000 per agency, and we had 138 agencies apply, wildly overwhelming the resources that we had available. Our own Strengthening Nonprofits Grant Committee, which normally makes nonprofit capacity building grants this time of year out of the Community Partnership Fund, provided the much needed manpower for this process, and there was a lot of time spent. They reviewed all 138 proposals and narrowed them down to 40 finalists. Even so, as we began this process, we thought we would only have enough funding to fund 23 or 24 of the 40 finalists. Meanwhile, the committee conducted virtual site visits with all 40 agencies and determined that all of them were worthy. Well, further tough decisions were avoided when this new national funder that I mentioned a minute ago came to the table and immediately contributed $1 million to the COVID-19 Regional Response Fund. That allowed us to fund all 40 agencies with grants totaling more than $1.7 million. It also left a little over $500,000 for a new phase 3 to fund future relief, which is great since the pandemic is obviously not going away anytime soon. The advisory committee will be deciding in the weeks ahead exactly where that phase 3 future relief funding will go. So the lessons of the MidSouth COVID-19 Regional Response Fund are many. It taught us that the Community Foundation can, in fact, be a nimble resource in times of community emergency. Most importantly, though, it reinforced yet again that we live in a wonderfully generous community full of people who are willing and able to come to the aid of their neighbors in trouble. So that's my first example of our ability to be nimble and respond to emerging community issues. And back to finish off this measuring our success, the second one under changes in the Community Foundation is we wanted to prove that we could retain and serve succeeding generations of donors. If you remember, our fund arrangements allow donors to name successors who can step into their shoes and manage their charitable funds when they're no longer around. Over the 50-year history of the foundation, we have literally hundreds of examples of successor donors stepping into their parents' shoes. In some cases, we're in touch with the third and even fourth generations of the families we've worked with. And that's, again, what we were set up to do, to serve our families in perpetuity. The last standard for measuring our success is changes in our donors. To start, our board was hoping to see our donors engage more deeply in our grant making and in our other community initiatives. And obviously, the COVID-19 Regional Response Fund is a perfect example of just that. We've seen donors work with us in a variety of other initiatives as well, including such diverse projects as the refinancing of New Ballet Ensemble's flagship building in Cooper Young, which just closed last week, and even in the Community Partnership Fund itself. The board was also looking to have our donors able to describe what they're doing and how the Community Foundation has helped them make a difference. We know those stories are out there, and we're working feverishly to try to capture those stories as effectively as we can. And then finally, we hope in time to see a donor base that is more diverse and more reflective of our community as a whole. Right now, our donor base, quite frankly, is not particularly diverse. We can do better, and we will in the years to come. So obviously, we've made quite a lot of headway in reaching these 10 strategic goals at a time when it's been particularly challenging to get much of anything done. Our office is still closed, and most of our staff has been working from home since March. We've seen real measurable changes in our community anyway, certainly in our foundation and in our donors. But there's still much to be done. And as I turn the page to that, I wanted to go back to our first goal. Create a new community endowment that will fund the work of the Community Partnership Fund in perpetuity. The Community Partnership Fund has been making a difference in our community for more than 25 years. It has funded groundbreaking programs like Beyond the Classroom. It has provided core funding for vital agencies that serve our community, like Momentum Nonprofit Partners, the Community Alliance for the Homeless, and Community Lift. This past summer, the Community Partnership Fund made an investment in the COVID Regional Response Fund as well. It funded dozens of grassroots neighborhood initiatives across our community, including projects in Cooper Young, South Memphis, Fraser, Binghamton, Hickory Hill, downtown, and many, many other places. It even kept the Blues Foundation in Memphis when it was struggling financially and considering a move out of town 15 or 20 years ago. The Blues Foundation can't be anywhere but Memphis. But as I said, the challenge of the Community Partnership Fund has always been that it's been funded on an annual pass-through basis, primarily by gifts from our donors. There's been no permanent funding source, and there's been little opportunity for growth. We've done a lot, like I just covered, but imagine what we could do with more resources. That's precisely why our board in this strategic plan moved to create a new community endowment to permanently sustain and hopefully grow the impact of the Community Partnership Fund. Again, we were scheduled to launch that new endowment in May and begin asking our donors and the broader community to help us build and grow that endowment, to serve Memphis and the MidSouth now and into the future, forever. And that's why we're calling it the Forever Funds. It's funds plural, because there are necessarily two components to this initiative: the endowment that will be invested and pay out annually to our grant making, and that annual grant making fund itself. We hope that donors will be excited about helping us build the endowment, but we also know that some of you will still want to support the Forever Fund's annual grant making year to year. As we prepared to introduce the Forever Funds, we realized that we needed to be able to clearly explain to the community what the Forever Funds stand for, what they will seek to accomplish, and who they will serve. So last fall, we undertook a community-wide listening and learning process to define exactly what our community investment principles are. We held a series of focus groups and listening sessions, which included members of our board, our donors, representatives of the nonprofit community, governmental leaders, and just plain regular people. What came out was a very clear, strong statement of principle. The vision statement says simply, we will create a just and equitable region where all individuals and groups receive the resources and opportunities they need to reach their full potential, and where identity and geography do not determine their outcomes. We'll build a community where everyone is welcome, valued, resourced, and informed, one where people can easily access opportunities to contribute and thrive. And that vision is again supported by 4 key values. Impact. We want to see real systemic change from our work. Accountability. We'll measure those impacts and report them transparently to our stakeholders. Inclusion. We insist that all community members' voices be heard and that decisions are made by people who reflect the demographics of the communities that we're serving. And finally, partnership and collaboration. We act together with our peers and appropriate partners to implement solutions for our community, and none of us can do it on our own. We have to work together. Our board adopted these community investment principles this past April in their first virtual meeting, forced onto Zoom by the growing pandemic. As April turned to May, we knew that the time was not right to launch a campaign for the Forever Funds, but as chance had it, a real opportunity presented itself to demonstrate to the community the kind of impact that the Community Foundation can have through the Forever Funds. As we contemplated the meaning of the community investment principles and its call for equity and opportunity, 3 groundbreaking national gifts to support historically Black colleges and universities were announced, $40 million each to Morehouse College, Spelman College, and the UNCF. As we have grown over the past several years, the Community Foundation has acquired a pool of assets that were at our discretion, but which were earmarked for specific community transformation. In an instant, we realized that we could have the same kind of transformational impact on our own HBCU, Moynihan College, that those other gifts had on their institutions, maybe even more so. So we called on our executive committee and called them together and they instantly allocated $40 million to a new endowment for Lemoyne-Owen. From a purely strategic perspective, this endowment does several things. First of all, it provides financial stability to Lemoyne-Owen for the first time in a long time, maybe even in its history. In recent years, Lemoyne-Owen has had trouble attracting the right visionary leader and maintaining enrollment. And small wonder what the president of the college had to spend all of his or her time raising money instead of educating students. And it's easy to see why students wouldn't want to bet on a school that, frankly, may not be around 4 years from now when it comes time for them to graduate. This endowment should substantially settle both of those issues. But from a broader perspective, what this community needs, as Beverly Robertson will tell you at our donor forum next month, is a better educated workforce. That's what attracts prospective employers to our community, which is what we need to grow our economy. And as our community investment principles tell us, we need to provide those opportunities to all of our citizens. So we need more college graduates, but we particularly need more Black college graduates. And of course, we need to make sure that they're graduating to real jobs as well. It will drive our economy and help make Memphis a more equitable, inclusive city. And we can do this. Incidentally, I think this also helps illustrate the board's strategic move from being neutral to fair. If it were neutral, we wouldn't do anything for Lemoyne-Owen that we wouldn't do for the U of M or Rhodes or CBU. But in establishing the endowment, the board opted to do what was fair, to strengthen a vital institution serving the largest and most vulnerable section of our community. Which brings us to our newest initiative. For several months, we've been working with 2 national funders on parallel initiatives that would result in their making significant multi-year investments to improve economic and social conditions in Memphis and the Mid-South. Most of you by now are probably familiar with the Kresge Foundation, which, as I said earlier, has been on the ground in Memphis for a couple of years now. The new name is Blue Meridian Partners. Blue Meridian is a new philanthropic cooperative founded by major national funders, including the Anna McConnell Clark Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and the Duke Endowment. The mission of Blue Meridian is to make large performance-based investments that address key drivers of poverty and make economic mobility a reality for all young people and their families. They bring a lot of experience to the table on these issues, but they rely on local voices to direct where their investments are best made. Last month, the Community Foundation received the first of what will be a total of $3.7 million to help fund these efforts in Memphis. Again, recognizing the harm that COVID was doing here and elsewhere, Blue Meridian directed the first $1 million to the MidSouth COVID Regional Response Fund. That was a significant gift that allowed us to fully fund the 40 finalists in the Phase 2 general operating support and leave $500,000 for a new Phase 3. The remaining $2.7 million, paired with another $4.3 million granted to Seeding Success, will fund a comprehensive community planning process to determine where additional investments will be most effective. The culmination will be somewhere between $60 and $100 million in future investments in Memphis to carry out those plans. At the same time, we've been working on a very similar initiative with the Kresge Foundation, which they call Shared Prosperity, which they define as the development of distinctive livable places through community engagement. Kresge has agreed to join with Blue Meridian on a unified effort that we're calling Power of Place. The result will be a huge investment in the future of Memphis based on solutions that we design for ourselves. So, the future is bright. In our 51-year history, the Community Foundation of Greater Memphis has grown from a single $1 million gift to become one of the largest community foundations in the country. We serve more than 1,000 individuals and families who have chosen the Community Foundation to help them organize, grow, and inform their charitable giving. Collectively, we constitute by far the largest grant maker in the Mid-South and one of the largest in the country. That's genuine impact. Impact accentuated by our demonstrated ability to respond to emerging community issues like the COVID-19 pandemic, and persistent, longstanding ones like growing our economy and providing opportunities for all of our neighbors. But we're just starting. As I said, there is still so much more to be done to ensure the strength, stability, and health of our community forever. Thanks. That's my prepared remarks.
All right. Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Terry. We did have a couple of questions come in and some others that were submitted beforehand. I think I'll start, Bob, with, we got a question when you were talking about the Lemoyne-Owen piece about how the Community Foundation is working with the Chamber and others to place Black, Indigenous, and people of color in high-paying jobs and retain those people and university graduates here.
And a lot of these efforts are just starting. I know that the chamber is starting to look at particularly senior positions in local companies. And we had a conversation in preparation for the forum next month. And we said, we can do great work in educating all the young people we can, but if they don't have jobs to step into, it doesn't really matter. So we definitely are going to be working in partnership with the chamber and in other groups to grow the hiring and particularly grow the attractiveness of jobs here, and in the process continue to attract new employers, because that's going to be the key to grow jobs and grow the economy.
Great. Terri, we had a question for you come in. What is the board looking at as kind of the next big thing for the Community Foundation, or what are they looking at in the next 12 months?
Well, I think the next big thing is something that Bob actually mentioned, and that is beginning to raise money for the Forever Fund. That community endowment will mean quite a lot for the Memphis community. It will be just what it says, forever. And to be able to raise dollars for that fund and to be able to then support the nonprofits that are doing excellent work in the MidSouth is really, really important. Let me also say that I think the work that the Community Foundation has begun on this phase 2 of the COVID-19 fund around capacity building is critical to being able to sustain organizations. One of the things that was most frightening, frankly, about this pandemic and our nonprofits is that there's a low level of capital that they have available to them. What the capacity building does is begins to help them build that infrastructure and begin to develop the ability to have more capital on hand. And that's actually, it's underappreciated, that type of work. So those are the two things from my vantage point that I think the board is focused on.
That's great. And I think that actually leads to the next question, Bob. How do you think the COVID-19 fund and really the rest of what's happened in 2020, do you think it has changed how the foundation will change its own discretionary giving? And if so, how do you think it's changed?
Yeah, let me say that I think 2020 in general, I think not just the COVID-19 pandemic, but also the other issues that have been happening this year, I think do change our view. For one thing, I think it changes our ability to approach the community to support the work that we're doing. I thought 5 months ago that it was going to be a long time before we could launch the Forever Funds and be able to make this appeal to the broader community to support the work that we're doing. What I've heard for the last couple months is the time is now. The Community Foundation has shown its ability to be responsive and to support the things that are the greatest need, and the time is now. So I think we're probably moving far more quickly to launch the Forever Funds than I ever really expected us to be. I also think that a lot of the social issues that have come up with the killings that I mentioned and some of the other responses that have come about as a result, I think it changes our view of the equity issues that we had adopted as part of our strategic plan. I think not that we never took it seriously, but I think I think it's more real. I think it's more tangible, and it's more something we feel more day to day than we probably did before. That's clearly changing, I think, the flow of where we're going to be going with community investments from the Forever Funds going forward. I think that mission statement from the community investment principles means a lot more today than it did even when we adopted it.
Awesome. Bob, there's another question that came in from one of the folks that's on that says, most of Community Foundation funding goes to organizations with the exception of scholarships and some other activities. So how is the Community Foundation looking to serve individuals for instance, through entrepreneurial fellowships and networking opportunities, or do they have the ability to serve individuals?
Yeah, for the most part, we don't have the ability to serve individuals directly, but that's not really our job. We've got great experts out in the field at the great agencies that we fund that know what they're doing, and they know how to reach the people that they're serving. We've known about the MidSouth Food Bank and the MIFAs for a long time. The COVID fund showed us the dozens and dozens and dozens of other agencies that are also reaching people. So our job is to put dollars in the hands of the people that are reaching the actual people that are in need. So that's a pretty huge responsibility on us to understand not only what the needs are, but who's actually meeting those needs.
Okay, so for those of you listening, there's no more questions in the Q&A box, so this is your chance to add. Oh, there's one. How are you working with Memphis corporate and banking institutions to align with nonprofits to create equity in Memphis? That's probably for you too.
Yeah, well, I mean, our work with corporate interests are largely somewhat directly through corporate philanthropy, but there's only a couple corporations that are active in corporate philanthropy. Otherwise, in terms of hiring and other equity approaches, we're going to be working through the chamber and their normal channels. But we're certainly going to be a loud voice. And Terri has encouraged us, given our size and our standing and our impact on the community, to use that voice. And we will certainly not be afraid to talk to corporate organizations, particularly large corporations, as we try to approach their senior executives to invest in the community. That's part of our strategic plan. But we'll certainly ask those corporations to do what they're supposed to do, to responsibly make sure that their hiring and their other activities in town are up to the equitable standards that we now are going to be requiring across the board.
Can I add something to that?
Please.
I think it was really important that the Community Foundation diversify its banking relationship and add Tri-State as a part of the equation. Additionally, I know that we will be diversifying some of our investment management as well. While those are active for our organization, they send a message to other organizations. And I think sometimes it's important to send a message by setting an example. And I think that we've taken the first steps in that.
Absolutely, that's our intention.
There's a follow-up question about some of the agencies that we're working with and how we are working with organizations in matters of racial equity, access, and inclusion. Bob, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about, how we're kind of changing our grant-making process to ask some more direct questions that we haven't asked in the past.
And as I said in my comments, we're just starting to get at this to make our grant-making more responsive and more representative of the neighborhoods that we serve. And we're still trying to figure out how to do that. But it's for one thing, it's going to involve a direct feedback loop from both the agencies that we're trying to fund, and including the agencies that we don't fund, and also particularly the clients that they serve. We're still trying to figure out exactly how that's going to happen. But that's going to be a very important part of our work, and something that we haven't really done in the past. Funders traditionally, because they have the checkbook, think that they get to do whatever they want to do. And I think that we've kind of realized that, and I know that there are a lot of voices in the nonprofit community that say that just helps persist a system that is not fair and is not equitable. So it is imperative that we listen to the people that we serve and listen to the people that we're not serving and funding, and also encourage our peer funders to do the same thing. We're starting to do that, by the way. The Community Foundation is co-leading an audit of local foundation funding to see, we're calling it an equity audit, to see where exactly local funders are putting their dollars in Memphis, including our funding and the funding of the other, particularly private foundations in town. That study is in process, and I think we expect to release the results of that before year end. But I think that'll be pretty telling to say, well, where are the limited philanthropic dollars in our community really going, and are they going to where they really should be going? But you have to start with those kinds of analyses. You have to see where we're missing to figure out how to get those resources to where they're doing the right thing. So, and we're trying to take those steps. A couple other things too. So in the COVID, in the phase 2 funding for the COVID Regional Response Fund, we started to do things a little bit differently. When we interview agencies, we used to just do sort of freewheeling questions. What we did this time was develop a standard list of questions so that everybody was being asked the same question in the same way and they had the same ability to respond. That actually is, again, fair, so that we're treating everybody the same, that everybody has the same access. And that is something that is a change for us and something that we're going to be learning how to do on our own.
The last question I'd like to ask both Terri and Bob, and Terri, maybe we can start with you. The question that we have been getting the most, I think, in the last 7 months is, and part of why we had the event last month about connecting wealth and privilege to purpose, is if I am a donor, if I'm a person with some means, and I want to figure out the best way to get involved and the best way to address pressing issues, what is your recommendation on how to start that process? Terri, you're on mute. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
That's all right.
So a couple of things. First of all, I think people have to figure out what am I passionate about? What am I excited about? What is it that I really want to accomplish? And then I think the Community Foundation does have a great tool that is a start. It's not the be all and end all, but it's a start. And that's where we live, where we give. To be able to delve into kind of what is out there in the community. And then it never hurts to sit down and talk with people who are in that realm to say, what is it that I should be paying attention to? I think that it is clear that there are a lot of needs in Memphis, Tennessee. There is no dearth of areas where people could invest and make a difference. But I do believe that people should make informed decisions about their philanthropy. And I think that that's not hard to do if you do some investigating. So a start is at the Community Foundation, but individuals should feel comfortable to reach out to nonprofit organizations that are descriptive of those things that they are excited about and doing really good work. And have a conversation with people to better understand what some of the challenges are, because frankly, sometimes what you see on paper is not reflective of the actual work that takes place in an organization. So we can't, I don't have anything against the BBBWise, GivingWise, and all the rest of those websites that rate organizations, but I don't think they're the best when it comes to how you learn about the actual work that an organization is doing and the impact that they're having on the community.
I think my answer to that is very similar, and that is that we have tried for the last 10 plus years to provide our donors and the broader community with as much information as they could about what the needs of the community are and who's doing a great job. That is the very simple reason that we created Live, Give, MidSouth, to provide a source of information on community needs, but also be a comprehensive directory of nonprofits that are trying to meet those needs, or address those needs. All of our donor programming has been informational to trying to help our donors understand better what was going on. I'll say though, I'll finish where Terri started, and that is that it depends on the donor themselves and what they desire. We don't, I want to be very clear on this, we don't intend to tell any donors what to do. All we can do is inform them on what we're seeing in the community, and they can take that information and act as they choose. Hopefully they will make some additional investments in areas that we've helped raise up. And maybe they won't, but that is their choice. That is the system that we were created to support. So I think that charitable giving is always about information. The more information that people have on the needs and on the organizations that are addressing those needs, the more effective that grant making will be, and the healthier and happier our community will be.
All right. That appears to be all of the questions that we've gotten so far. Terri and Bob, I want to thank you guys both for your time tonight and thank the 100 or so people that have logged on to listen to us. Please visit our website at cfgm.org for more information about the Regional COVID-19 Fund or any of the other work that we do. And you'll also be able to see all of the events that we have coming up between now and the end of the year so that you can continue to invest in the work that we're doing here at the Community Foundation. So thank you all for being here today, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Goodbye.